The first time my family erased me in public, it happened at Christmas dinner, with 23 people watching and no one saying a word. My name is Claire Morgan, and I was 32 years old when I realized that silence can be a weapon. It started with a sentence that wasn't supposed to hurt, but did. "We didn't think you'd mind," my mother, Eleanor Morgan, said lightly, adjusting the centerpiece on the dining table as if she were discussing napkin colors instead of my life. "You're so independent." What she meant was, you don't matter enough to ask. Before I go any further, if stories about family betrayal, delayed justice, and cold revenge resonate with you, take a second to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe. You'll want to hear how this ends. I didn't respond right away. I was standing in my parents' dining room in Westchester County, New York, the same room where every major family decision had been made without me. The mahogany table was set for Christmas Eve, 12 seats filled, one conspicuously empty, mine. That was when I understood something had shifted. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but permanently. The empty chair wasn't a mistake. I was the middle child, the quiet one, the reliable one. My older brother, Andrew Morgan, was the family's golden boy, a 40-year-old real estate developer who talked loudly, laughed easily, and never paid for his own drinks. My younger sister, Melissa Morgan, was the favorite, 30, married into money, endlessly praised for breathing. And then there was me, Claire, the one who learned early that being low maintenance meant being invisible. Growing up, the favoritism wasn't overt. It came in small, deniable doses. Andrew's soccer games were non-negotiable family events. Melissa's dance recitals were filmed from 3 angles. My academic competitions were nice to hear about later. I adapted. I always did. By 28, I had built a career in financial compliance, working as a senior risk analyst at a fintech firm in Manhattan. By 30, I was director of regulatory strategy, overseeing a team of 17, managing audits across 6 states, responsible for decisions involving billions of dollars in exposure. None of that impressed my family. "What do you actually do again?" Andrew once asked me at Thanksgiving, swirling bourbon in his glass. I didn't answer. I never did. The Christmas dinner, where the chair was missing, was supposed to be different. That year, my grandmother, Margaret Collins, my mother's mother, had passed away in October. She'd been the quiet observer in the family, sharp-eyed, rarely intervening. She was also wealthy. Her estate hadn't been discussed openly yet, but everyone knew it was coming. The house in Connecticut, the investment accounts, the trust she'd established years earlier. That Christmas wasn't about togetherness. It was about positioning. I noticed the changes immediately. Andrew was suddenly attentive to my father, Richard Morgan, asking about his health, his blood pressure, his retirement plans. Melissa hovered near my mother, offering help in the kitchen she'd never offered before. And me? I was handed a glass of wine and pointed toward the living room. "Why don't you sit there for now, Claire?" Eleanor said, already turning away. The dinner conversation flowed without me. Plans were referenced that I hadn't been part of. A ski trip, a lawyer meeting, a family discussion scheduled for early January. I caught fragments, nothing explicit. Just enough to understand I wasn't included. That was the first mini-fracture. The one that told me something was happening behind my back. After dinner, while everyone else gathered around the fireplace, I overheard my aunt, Diane Foster, whisper to my mother near the hallway. "She won't make a fuss," Diane said. "She never does." My mother didn't argue. That night, I drove back to my apartment in Brooklyn with a tightness in my chest I couldn't name. I replayed the evening over and over, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. I wasn't. 2 weeks later, I found out the truth. By accident. It was January 9th, a Thursday. I was leaving my office at 8:40 p.m., the city slick with freezing rain, when my phone buzzed with a group text notification. The message wasn't meant for me. Andrew had sent it to the wrong Claire, Dad confirmed. "Estate meeting is Sunday. Lawyer says better this way. Less complicated." Less complicated than what? Than me. I stood under a flickering streetlight on Lexington Avenue, reading the message again and again. There was no follow-up, no correction, no apology. They knew exactly what they were doing. That was the moment I lost my footing. Not because of money, not because of inheritance, but because they had decided collectively, that I wasn't entitled to be present for a conversation about my own family. I called my mother that night. Why wasn't I invited to the meeting with Grandma's lawyer? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. There was a pause, just long enough. Oh, Claire, Eleanor said gently. We didn't think it was necessary. You're not really involved in family assets. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. I'm her granddaughter. Yes, but Andrew handles property matters, and Melissa is, well, Melissa. And me? Another pause. You've always been so independent. That word again. Independent. As if it were a compliment. As if it justified exclusion. I hung up without arguing. That was new for me. In the past, I would have explained myself, defended my place, asked to be included. This time, I said nothing. What my family didn't understand was that silence works both ways. Over the next few weeks, I watched from the outside as decisions were made, papers were signed, and narratives were formed. I noticed the subtle shift in tone when my name came up, the way conversations stopped when I entered a room. I also noticed something else. They were underestimating me. They had decided I wouldn't fight because I never had before. They were wrong. By the time February arrived, I had already scheduled my own meeting. Not with family, with Jonathan Pierce, a probate attorney in Midtown, who specialized in contested estates and fiduciary misconduct. I didn't know yet how far this would go. I only knew one thing. If they were going to erase me, I would make sure they did it in writing. And that would be their mistake. Because once something is documented, it can be used. The next chapter begins with the reading of a will I was never meant to hear. I wasn't supposed to be in that room. That much was clear the moment Jonathan Pierce closed the glass conference room door and raised his eyebrows slightly, a silent question. He was in his early 50s, crisp navy suit, the kind of lawyer who didn't waste words or time. His office overlooked Bryant Park, all clean lines and quiet authority. You understand, he said evenly, that if your grandmother's estate has already entered private probate, access to documents won't be straightforward. I'm not here to interfere, I replied. I'm here to understand what was done without me. That distinction mattered. He studied me for a second longer, then nodded. Start from the beginning, he said. So I did. I told him about Margaret Collins, my grandmother, who died at 87 after a brief illness. About how she'd lived alone in Greenwich, Connecticut for decades, managing her own finances long after my grandfather passed. About how she used to call me on Sunday afternoons to ask about my job, not because she understood fintech, but because she liked that I sounded confident. She was the only one who ever asked, I said. Jonathan listened without interrupting. I told him about Christmas, the empty chair, the estate meeting I was excluded from, the text message Andrew sent by mistake, my mother's explanation that somehow explained nothing. When I finished, Jonathan leaned back and folded his hands. Do you have any reason to believe the will was changed shortly before her death? He asked. Yes, I said. Because 6 months before she died, my grandmother told me she was revising it. And she told me why. That was the part no one else knew. In May, I had driven up to Greenwich to help Margaret organize paperwork after she had a minor fall. She insisted she was fine. She always did. But as we sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by file folders and old bank statements, she said something that stuck with me. Your mother thinks I don't notice things, she said calmly, sliding a stack of documents into a drawer. But I do. I didn't ask what she meant. I never had to. She's been bringing Andrew around more often, Margaret continued. And Melissa. They're very attentive lately. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I'm not senile, Claire, she said. I know when people are auditioning. Then she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You've always been the only one who never asked me for anything. That was when she told me she was changing her will. Not to punish anyone, she said, but to be fair. I want things settled before people start fighting, she told me. And they will fight. I didn't tell anyone about that conversation. Not then. I didn't think I needed to. Jonathan was quiet when I finished. Did you ever see the revised will? He asked. No, I said. But I know she met with her attorney, Helen Rollins, in June. I drove her there. That caught his attention. You drove her? Yes. And waited in the lobby for an hour. I remember because she came out angry. Angry? She said Helen had been pressured. that someone had called ahead. She wouldn't say who. Jonathan stood and walked to the window, looking down at the park. "If someone influenced the drafting of the will," he said slowly, "or restricted access to one beneficiary, that's a problem, especially if there's evidence of undue influence." I didn't smile. I didn't feel relieved. I felt cold. "Can we get a copy of the will?" I asked. "Eventually," he said, "but not without resistance." I expected that. What I didn't expect was how quickly my family moved once they realized I was no longer passive. 2 days after my meeting with Jonathan, my sister Melissa Morgan called me for the first time in months. "Claire," she said brightly, too brightly, "we should get coffee. Just us." I almost laughed. We met at a cafe near Union Square, neutral ground. She arrived 10 minutes late, wearing a beige coat I recognized from a brand she couldn't afford without her husband. "I heard you talk to a lawyer," she said after we ordered. "Straight to it, no pretense." "Who told you that?" I asked. She smiled thinly. "You know Mom talks." "I did." "Why would you do that?" Melissa asked. "It makes things messy." "Messy for who?" I said. "For everyone," she replied quickly. "Grandma wouldn't want this." "You didn't invite me to the estate meeting," I said. "You didn't think that was messy?" She shifted in her seat. "That was Andrew's idea," she said. "He handles these things, and you went along with it." Melissa sighed, like I was exhausting her. "You always make things complicated, Claire." There it was, the familiar accusation. The one they used whenever I asserted myself. "I'm not making anything complicated," I said calmly. "I'm asking to be included." She looked at me for a long moment, then leaned forward. "Listen," she said quietly. "The will is already filed. There's nothing you can do." That was the first threat. I finished my coffee and stood. "Then you shouldn't be worried," I said. Her eyes followed me as I walked out. That night, Andrew called. Not to reconcile, to negotiate. "Let's not do this the hard way," he said. "Dad's already stressed. Mom's a mess." "You didn't think about stress when you excluded me," I replied. "This isn't personal," he said. "It's business." That told me everything. "You cut me out," I said. "And now you're afraid I'll cut back." He exhaled sharply. "What do you want?" he asked. I paused. "I want transparency," I said. "And I want what Grandma intended." He laughed, low and dismissive. "You were never her favorite," he said. "You just think you were." The line went quiet after that. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I called Jonathan instead. The next morning, his assistant emailed me a scanned document. It wasn't the full will. It was a codicil, dated 3 weeks before Margaret Collins died. My name wasn't on it. Not removed, just missing. And at the bottom of the page, beneath a shaky signature, was the name of a witness I recognized immediately. Eleanor Morgan, my mother. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't neglect. This was deliberate. And if they thought I would quietly disappear, they had misunderstood the kind of woman I had become. Because once you lose your place in a family, you either accept it or you take it back, piece by piece. The next chapter begins with a funeral, where I was invited too late, and a truth that surfaced in front of everyone. The invitation to my grandmother's funeral arrived 3 days late. It was a cream-colored envelope, thick paper, my name typed instead of handwritten. Formal, careful, too careful. By the time it reached my mailbox in Brooklyn, the service had already been scheduled for the following morning in Greenwich. No phone call, no explanation, just an assumption that I would rearrange my life to accommodate a decision made without me. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. That delay was intentional. I knew that much. Funerals have a way of forcing proximity, of making people confront each other in rooms they can't easily escape. My family had always preferred control over confrontation. Sending the invitation late gave them an excuse if I didn't show, and a performance if I did. I decided to go, not for closure, not for reconciliation, for observation. The church was full when I arrived. St. Andrew's, the same place where Andrew and Melissa had been baptized, confirmed, celebrated. I slipped into a pew near the back, unnoticed at first. That changed quickly. My mother, Eleanor Morgan, spotted me as she turned from speaking with a neighbor. Her expression flickered. Surprise first, then calculation, then something that looked like irritation. She didn't come over. Neither did my father, Richard Morgan, who sat in the front row beside Andrew and Melissa, his posture rigid, his hands folded too tightly. Andrew glanced back once, saw me, then looked away. Melissa didn't look back at all. That was fine. I hadn't come to be seen by them. I had come to see. The service was restrained. Polite grief. Carefully measured stories about Margaret Collins that highlighted her generosity, her sharp mind, her devotion to family. I listened to people talk about a woman I knew intimately, but publicly differently. When the minister invited family members to speak, Andrew stood. He talked about tradition, about legacy, about how his grandmother had trusted him to carry things forward. That phrase landed wrong. I watched my mother nod as he spoke, her face solemn, almost proud. Melissa dabbed her eyes with a tissue, though I didn't see tears. Then something unexpected happened. A woman in her late 60s rose from the third pew. I recognized her immediately. Helen Rollins, my grandmother's attorney. There was a murmur in the room. This wasn't planned. I apologize, Helen said evenly, addressing the minister. But I believe it's important to clarify something. Every head turned. My name is Helen Rollins. I represented Margaret Collins for over 20 years, she continued. And I feel compelled to correct the record. Helen's gaze swept the room, briefly landing on Andrew, then Eleanor, then stopping on me. Margaret was deeply intentional about her estate planning, Helen said. She revised her will twice in the last year of her life. The second revision was made under circumstances I later found troubling. A ripple of discomfort moved through the pews. I objected at the time, Helen went on, but I was overridden by family pressure and concerns about Margaret's health. I regret that. My mother stiffened. I could see it even from the back. Helen took a breath. There was one granddaughter in particular whom Margaret spoke about often, she said. One she described as steady, honest, and unfairly overlooked. Silence. Her name is Claire Morgan. The sound that followed wasn't a gasp. It was worse. A collective shift. People turning to look at me. Faces recalibrating. I stayed seated, Helen continued. Margaret intended for Claire to be included in all estate discussions. She was not. That exclusion did not come from Margaret. Andrew stood abruptly. This is inappropriate, he snapped. This isn't the place. Helen met his eyes calmly. It's exactly the place, she said. The minister hesitated, clearly out of his depth. But Helen had already said what mattered. She sat down. The service ended shortly after. There was no neat resolution, no confrontation at the altar, just unease. At the reception afterward, people avoided my family in subtle ways. Conversations stopped when Eleanor approached. Andrew found himself suddenly without an audience. I didn't linger. I didn't need to. As I turned to leave, my mother caught up with me near the exit. "How dare you?" she said quietly, her smile still fixed for anyone watching. "How dare you let her do that?" "I didn't," I replied. "I didn't even know she would." "That woman embarrassed us," Eleanor hissed. "No," I said. She told the truth. Eleanor's eyes hardened. "You're enjoying this," she said. I shook my head. "I'm paying attention," I corrected. My father stood a few feet away, watching us. For a moment, I thought he might say something. He didn't. That was the last time I waited for him to. 2 days later, Jonathan Pierce called me. "They filed the estate," he said, "and they're moving fast." "Good," I said. "So are we." He paused. "There's something else," he added. "The codicil you saw? It's invalid." I closed my eyes. "The witness signature doesn't meet state requirements," Jonathan explained. "Your mother's involvement alone raises serious questions. But there's more." "What?" I asked. "Helen Rollins kept copies. Notes, emails, including one from your grandmother, sent 2 days before her death. He forwarded it to me while we were on the phone. The subject line read, 'I need this fixed.' The body was short. If you're reading this, they've done exactly what I feared. Do not let them erase Claire." I sat on my couch, staring at the screen. "They thought I wouldn't fight," I said quietly. "They thought wrong," Jonathan replied. "The next phase wouldn't be quiet. It wouldn't be polite. And it would take everything they believed they controlled and put it under a microscope." The next chapter begins with a lawsuit my family never saw coming, and a secret my brother was desperate to keep buried. The lawsuit was filed on a Monday morning, at exactly 9:07 a.m. That detail mattered to me. It meant Andrew Morgan would be driving into Manhattan traffic, coffee in hand, thinking about his next deal, his next lunch meeting, his next controlled outcome. Completely unaware that the ground under him had shifted, Jonathan Pierce called me as soon as the clerk stamped the documents. "It's official," he said. "Petition to contest the will, allegation of undue influence, improper witnessing, and exclusion of a lawful beneficiary." I let out a slow breath. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," Jonathan said, "they panic." He was right. By noon, my phone lit up. Missed calls from my mother, my father, Andrew, Melissa, even an unfamiliar number I later learned belonged to Thomas Keller, the family's longtime accountant. I didn't answer any of them. Not because I was afraid of what they'd say, but because for the first time in my life, I didn't need to hear it. The first person to confront me in person was Andrew. He showed up at my apartment that evening, without warning, pounding on the door like he owned it. I watched him through the peephole for a full 10 seconds before opening it. He looked different, not polished, not confident. His tie was loose, his hair unstyled, his jaw tight with contained anger. "You sued us," he said, stepping inside without being invited. "I sued the estate," I corrected, closing the door behind him. "You're just involved." "That's the same thing and you know it," he snapped. "Do you have any idea what this does to our family?" I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. "You didn't worry about the family when you erased me from it," I said. He laughed sharply. "This is about money," he said. "Don't pretend it's not." "It's about control," I replied. "You've always had it. I'm taking some back." Andrew's eyes narrowed. "You don't belong in this," he said. "You never did." There it was. The truth. Finally unfiltered. I held his gaze. "You're afraid," I said calmly, "and it's making you sloppy." His jaw flexed. "You think you're smarter than us now because you have a lawyer?" he asked. "No," I said. "I think you're exposed." That got his attention. "What does that mean?" he asked. I didn't answer, because the truth was, I didn't know everything yet. But I knew enough to keep digging. The discovery phase moved faster than Jonathan expected. Helen Rollins cooperated fully, handing over decades of correspondence. The codicil was officially flagged. The court ordered a temporary freeze on estate assets, and then the first real secret surfaced. It came from a deposition request sent to Andrew's development company, Morgan Ridge Properties. On paper, it was a routine inquiry into potential conflicts of interest involving estate assets. In practice, it cracked everything open. Jonathan called me late one night. "Andrew used estate funds," he said. "For what?" I asked. "To cover a failed project in Hoboken," he replied. 3 years ago. "He lost nearly $2 million and quietly borrowed against your grandmother's investment account to plug the hole." I closed my eyes. "That's illegal," I said. "Yes," Jonathan confirmed. "And he never disclosed it, not to the family, not to Margaret." The picture started to come together. Andrew hadn't just excluded me out of habit or convenience. He had needed control. Needed to keep scrutiny away from finances that wouldn't hold up under examination. Including me in estate discussions meant including someone who understood compliance, audits, and paper trails. Someone like me. The next confrontation came from my mother. She invited me to lunch, as if we were two women repairing a misunderstanding, instead of a mother trying to regain leverage. We met at a restaurant in Scarsdale she liked because the staff knew her name. She ordered for both of us without asking. "You've humiliated us," Eleanor said, once the waiter left. "I didn't speak to the media," I replied. "I didn't call the family. I followed the law." "You dragged us into court," she said. "People are talking." I took a sip of water. "They should," I said. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "What do you want?" she asked. "There it is," I said. "The question you never asked when I was growing up." She flinched. "You always had food, shelter, education," she said sharply. "We did our duty." "You did the minimum," I replied, and expected gratitude. Her voice dropped. "If you drop the case," she said, "we can make this right." "How?" I asked. She hesitated. "Andrew is willing to give you a portion," she said. "A settlement." I almost smiled. "A portion of what Grandma intended for me?" I asked. "That depends," she said, "on how cooperative you are." I stood. "That's not an offer," I said. "It's a bribe." Her face hardened. "You've changed," she said. "No," I replied. "You just never noticed who I was." I left before dessert. The next day, Melissa testified. She cried on the stand. Softly, convincingly. Talked about stress, about family pressure, about not understanding the documents she signed. But then Jonathan asked one question. "Did you know your brother had borrowed against Margaret Collins's account?" Melissa froze. "No," she said quickly. Jonathan slid a document across the table. Her signature was on it. The silence that followed was heavy. She had known. She had signed. She had lied. By the end of the week, Andrew's attorney requested a private meeting. Not with me, with Jonathan. The message was clear. They were ready to bargain. What they didn't understand was that bargaining only works when both sides are desperate. I wasn't. I had already lost my place in the family. Already been erased. Already learned to stand alone. This wasn't about winning money. It was about making sure they could never rewrite what they'd done. The next chapter begins with a courtroom revelation that changes who controls the estate and who walks away with nothing but their reputation in ruins. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. White walls, wood benches. No drama in the architecture. Just a quiet space where facts were supposed to matter more than feelings. I arrived early and sat in the second row, hands folded in my lap, breathing slow and even. Across the aisle, my family gathered like strangers, forced into the same waiting room. My mother, Eleanor Morgan, sat rigidly beside my father, Richard Morgan, her posture controlled, her face composed the way she always wore it in public. Andrew Morgan paced near the back, whispering urgently to his attorney, Paul Whitman, a man whose expensive suit couldn't hide how tired he looked. Melissa Morgan sat alone, eyes red, shoulders hunched, her phone clenched like a lifeline. No one acknowledged me. That was fine. I wasn't there to be acknowledged. Judge Ellen Ramirez entered promptly at 10 a.m., a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and no patience for theatrics. She took her seat, scanned the room, and got straight to it. "We are here to determine whether the estate of Margaret Collins was administered in accordance with the law," she said, "and whether undue influence or misconduct occurred." Jonathan Pierce rose calmly when it was his turn. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize. He laid out timelines, signatures, financial transfers, facts. He introduced Helen Rollins' testimony, the emails, the notes, the codicil signed under questionable conditions. Then he moved to the financial records. "Exhibit 14, Jonathan said, handing documents to the clerk. A transfer of $1,984,000 from Margaret Collins's investment account to Morgan Ridge Properties." Andrew stiffened. Jonathan continued. "This transfer occurred without the account holder's knowledge, was never disclosed, and was later concealed through internal accounting adjustments." Paul Whitman objected. Weakly, Judge Ramirez overruled him without looking up. Andrew took the stand. He tried confidence first, then charm, then indignation. When Jonathan asked him why the transfer hadn't been disclosed to his grandmother, Andrew said, "It was temporary. I planned to pay it back." "Did you?" Jonathan asked. Andrew hesitated. "No," he admitted. "And when Margaret Collins revised her will 6 months later," Jonathan continued, "you were present for that meeting, correct?" "Yes." "And did you inform her of the transfer then?" Andrew swallowed. "No." Jonathan nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. Melissa followed. She cried again. Her voice shook as she claimed she hadn't understood what she signed, that she trusted her brother, that she'd felt pressured. Then Jonathan showed the text messages, not opinions, not impressions. Messages from Melissa to Andrew discussing the risk of Claire asking too many questions and the need to finalize things before she gets involved. Melissa broke down after that. My mother didn't take the stand. Her attorney argued it wasn't necessary. Judge Ramirez disagreed. Eleanor Morgan sat straighter than I'd ever seen her. She spoke carefully. She framed everything as concern, protection, family unity. When Jonathan asked her why she had witnessed the codicil herself instead of using a neutral party, she said, "I was there. It was convenient." "And legal?" Jonathan asked. She hesitated. "I believed it was," she said. Judge Ramirez made a note. My father spoke last. His voice was quiet, apologetic. He said he hadn't known everything, that he'd trusted Andrew, that he'd hoped things would work out. I watched him closely. This was the first time I'd seen him uncertain in years. After 3 days of testimony, Judge Ramirez recessed. When she returned, the room felt different. Quieter. Tighter. "I find that undue influence occurred," she said plainly. "That estate funds were misappropriated. And that the exclusion of Claire Morgan from estate proceedings was intentional and improper." My mother closed her eyes. "The codicil dated 3 weeks before Margaret Collins's death is invalid," the judge continued. "The will dated June 14th stands." That was the version my grandmother had told me about. My breath caught. "Furthermore," Judge Ramirez said, "due to fiduciary misconduct, Andrew Morgan is removed as executor, effective immediately." Andrew surged to his feet. "You can't." "Sit down," the judge said calmly. She appointed a court-supervised administrator. She ordered restitution. She referred the financial misconduct to the district attorney, and then she looked directly at me. "Claire Morgan," she said, "you are entitled to your full share of the estate." It wasn't a victory lap. There was no satisfaction in my chest, just a steady sense of balance being restored. Outside the courtroom, Andrew didn't speak to me. Melissa avoided my eyes. My father lingered, as if he wanted to say something. My mother walked past me without a word. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the city humming outside, the weight of the day settling in. I hadn't asked to be chosen. I had asked not to be erased. And I had been heard. The next chapter begins with the fallout no one prepares you for when the truth becomes public and the people who wronged you start losing more than money. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. The court ruling was public record. Within 48 hours, it moved from legal databases to whispered conversations, then to polite inquiries, then to open speculation. Andrew Morgan's name began appearing in places it never had before, not in glossy real estate profiles or charity galas, but in articles about fiduciary misconduct and ongoing investigations. I didn't share the ruling. I didn't announce it. I didn't explain myself to anyone outside my lawyer. I went to work. That alone seemed to unsettle people more than any statement would have. On Monday morning, I walked into my office in Midtown at 8:15 a.m. Same as always. I reviewed compliance reports, signed off on regulatory filings, led a 30-minute meeting on upcoming audits. I didn't mention court. I didn't take personal calls. By lunchtime, 3 colleagues had casually asked if everything was okay with my family. "It's handled," I said each time. That answer traveled faster than gossip. By Wednesday, Andrew's first major client pulled out of a development deal. By Friday, a lender froze a line of credit pending clarification of recent events. None of that had anything to do with me, officially. But reputation works on suggestion, not proof. The first person to break was my father. Richard Morgan called me late one evening, his voice unsteady in a way I'd never heard before. "I should have stopped it," he said without preamble. I didn't interrupt. "I saw things," he continued. "I didn't ask questions. I thought it wasn't my place. That was the problem, I thought. No one ever thought it was their place." "I'm sorry," he said finally. I believed he meant it. "I know," I said. He waited, maybe for forgiveness, maybe for comfort. I didn't give him either. The next call came from my mother's number. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. "This has gone far enough, Claire," Eleanor said, her voice controlled but strained. "Andrew is under enormous pressure. The family is suffering. You've made your point." That word again. Point. As if dignity were a demonstration. As if self-respect were a performance that could end once the audience felt uncomfortable. I deleted the message. Melissa showed up 2 days later. Not at my apartment, not at my office. At a coffee shop near my building, where she knew I stopped on Thursday mornings. She looked smaller than I remembered, less polished. Her coat was wrinkled, her eyes tired. "Can we talk?" she asked when I approached the counter. I considered walking past her. Instead, I ordered my coffee and sat. She spoke quickly, like she was afraid I'd leave. "Andrew's lawyer says the DA might press charges," she said. "He's panicking. Mom hasn't slept. Dad barely eats." I watched her hands twist around her cup. "And?" I asked. Her eyes flicked up, startled. "And?" "This is tearing us apart," she said. "I know what we did was wrong, I do. But do you really want to destroy him?" I took a slow sip. "I didn't destroy him," I said. "He destroyed himself. I just stopped covering for it." She shook her head. "You're cold," she said. "You weren't always like this." "No," I agreed. "I wasn't." That was the truth. I had been accommodating, flexible, silent. I had absorbed discomfort so others wouldn't have to feel it. That version of me had been useful to them. Melissa leaned forward. "What do you want now?" she asked quietly. The question sounded different coming from her, less entitled, more afraid. "I want distance," I said. "And I want you to stop trying to make this my responsibility." She swallowed. "If Andrew goes to jail, that's not on me," I said evenly. She sat back, eyes glossy. "Mom says you've always held grudges," she said. I almost smiled. "I didn't hold grudges," I said. "I held memories. There's a difference." She left without finishing her drink. 2 weeks later, the district attorney's office announced a formal investigation into Morgan Ridge Properties. Andrew's name was listed. So was the amount, $1,984,000. The number followed him everywhere. Deals stalled. Invitations stopped. People he'd once dismissed began avoiding eye contact. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I had been the one quietly excluded. Now, exclusion was happening to him, and he had no idea how to survive it. The final shift came unexpectedly. Jonathan Pierce called me one afternoon, his tone measured. "There's a provision in the June will," he said. "One that wasn't discussed in court because it wasn't contested." "What kind of provision?" I asked. "A conditional trust," he said. Margaret Collins set aside a portion of the estate to be distributed at the discretion of one beneficiary. "You." I closed my eyes. "What kind of discretion?" I asked. Jonathan hesitated. "She wrote that you were to decide who, if anyone, deserved access. Based on integrity." I laughed once, quietly. "She knew," I said. "Yes," Jonathan replied. "She did." I didn't tell my family about that provision. I didn't need to. They were already facing consequences far more uncomfortable than money. And I was learning something new. Something I hadn't expected. Revenge wasn't loud. It didn't require cruelty. It simply required stepping aside and letting the truth do what it always does when no one interferes. The next chapter begins with a decision that forces me to choose between mercy and finality, and a family dinner that changes the balance one last time. The dinner invitation came from my mother, not a text, not a voicemail, a handwritten note slipped under my apartment door like an apology she didn't trust herself to say out loud. "Claire, we need to talk. Just us. One dinner. No lawyers, no arguments. Please." She signed it, Eleanor, not Mom. That detail mattered. I didn't respond right away. I let the note sit on my kitchen counter for 2 days, unread except for the first glance. By the third morning, I realized something else mattered more than the invitation itself. She had come to my building. She had stood in my hallway. For the first time in my life, she had crossed into my space instead of summoning me into hers. I agreed to dinner, not because I owed her closure, but because unresolved things have a way of lingering, and I wanted this one to end cleanly. We met at a restaurant in Manhattan she would never have chosen before. Small, quiet, no private room, no familiar faces. I picked it deliberately. She arrived early. When I walked in, she stood halfway out of her chair, unsure whether to hug me. I didn't give her the chance. We sat. She looked older. Not frail, but worn. The kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from sustained loss of control. "I didn't raise you to do this," she said after the waiter left. I waited. "To drag your family through court," she continued. "To expose us." "I didn't raise myself either," I said. "But here we are." Her mouth tightened. "You always exaggerate," she said. "Things weren't that bad." I met her eyes. "Name one time you chose me when it cost you something," I said calmly. She opened her mouth, closed it. "I did my best," she said finally. "No," I replied. "You did what was easiest." The words landed harder than I expected. She inhaled sharply. "Andrew is in serious trouble," she said. "The investigation is moving fast. If he's charged, his life is over." I nodded. "Yes," I said. "It might be." She leaned forward. "You could help," she said. The trust, the discretion. We know about it. So she had done her homework. I could, I agreed. And? She pressed. And I won't, I said. She stared at me, disbelief flashing across her face. He's your brother, she said. And I was your daughter, I replied. Silence stretched between us. She spoke again, quieter. Do you know what people are saying about us? She asked. About me? Yes, I said. You taught me to pay attention to reputation. Her eyes filled, but the tears didn't fall. I was protecting the family, she said. You were protecting the image, I corrected. There's a difference. She shook her head. You always had to make things difficult, she said. I smiled faintly. No, I said. I just stopped making them easy for you. The waiter returned. She didn't touch her food. Is there anything I can do? She asked. It wasn't an apology. It was a negotiation. Yes, I said. You can stop asking me to fix what you broke. Her shoulders slumped. I don't recognize you, she said softly. That makes two of us, I replied. We paid separately. As I stood to leave, she reached for my wrist, then stopped herself. I hope one day you forgive us, she said. I paused. Forgiveness isn't the same as access, I said. And you lost access a long time ago. I walked out without looking back. That night, Andrew was formally charged. 3 counts. Fraud, misappropriation, falsifying financial records. The news broke quietly. A single paragraph buried in the business section. No photo, no headline. That was worse for him than publicity. Melissa called me once more. I didn't answer. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table and opened the trust documents Jonathan had sent earlier that day. I read my grandmother's handwriting carefully. Integrity is what remains when no one is watching. I closed the folder. The decision I made that night wasn't about mercy or punishment. It was about alignment. The next chapter begins with the execution of that decision. And the moment my family realizes the door isn't just closed, it's locked. The first transfer from the discretionary trust went out on a Tuesday morning at 10:12 a.m., not to my family. That detail was deliberate. I sat at my desk at work, screens glowing, compliance reports open, and signed the authorization digitally with the same hand I used to approve regulatory filings worth 10 times the amount. The beneficiary was a scholarship fund connected to a legal aid organization in Queens, one that helped women navigating financial abuse and family coercion. No announcement. No press release, just alignment. Jonathan Pierce called me an hour later. You're certain? He asked. Yes, I said. Once trust funds move, especially discretionary ones, they set precedent. My family would find out eventually. I wanted them to find out by noticing what didn't happen. No money coming their way. No quiet assistance. No back-channel support. The silence would speak for me. Andrew was out on bail when he called. His voice sounded unfamiliar. Smaller, like a man trying to occupy less space than he once did. I need to talk to you, he said. You've had years, I replied. This is different, he said quickly. I'm in trouble. I didn't respond. The charges, he continued. They're serious. I didn't think it would go this far. I know, I said. There was a pause. I need help, he said finally. The simplicity of the statement almost impressed me. I can't help you, I said. You can, he insisted. The trust, Mom said. Your lawyer should have explained something to you, I interrupted. The trust exists to reward integrity, not proximity. He exhaled sharply. You're enjoying this, he said. I leaned back in my chair. No, I said. I'm finished with it. He went quiet. You always thought you were better than us, he said. No, I replied. I just stopped letting you decide my value. He hung up. Melissa tried next. She didn't ask for money. She asked for understanding. We grew up the same way, she said. Mom treated us differently, but we didn't know better. You benefited from it, I said. She didn't deny it. I'm scared, she said. I was scared too, I replied, for a long time, alone. That ended the conversation. My father sent a letter. Not an email, a letter. He wrote about regret, about mistakes, about wishing he'd spoken up sooner. He didn't ask for money. He asked to see me. I considered it longer than I expected. Then I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. Not because he didn't deserve closure, but because I didn't owe it. The second transfer from the trust went out the following week. This one funded a grant for compliance training at a nonprofit that worked with small family businesses. The irony wasn't lost on me. By the end of the month, Andrew's legal team formally withdrew the request for assistance. They stopped calling. The family group chat went silent. Then, something shifted. People began reaching out to me directly. Distant relatives, old acquaintances, people who'd watched quietly for years and suddenly felt safe acknowledging what had happened. One message stood out. Your grandmother would be proud. It wasn't from anyone in my immediate family. That felt right. The final test came unexpectedly. A court notice arrived in my mailbox. Andrew's attorney had filed a motion requesting access to the discretionary trust, arguing familial hardship. Jonathan called me immediately. "We'll fight it," he said. "We won't need to," I replied. I drafted my response myself. Short, precise, factual. No beneficiary named in the motion meets the criteria set forth by Margaret Collins regarding integrity, conduct, or good faith. No funds will be released. I signed it and sent it back. The judge denied the motion within 48 hours. That was the moment the door locked. Not slammed, locked. That night, I stood on my balcony overlooking the city, the noise below steady and indifferent. I realized something that surprised me. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt light. For the first time in my life, my family no longer occupied mental space they hadn't earned. The next chapter begins with the aftermath no one warned you about when revenge is quiet, justice is delayed, and healing starts where the chaos ends. The quiet afterward was the hardest part. No more court dates, no more legal calls, no more sudden spikes of adrenaline when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. The chaos that had defined the last year of my life evaporated, leaving behind a stillness I hadn't planned for. People talk about revenge like it's an ending. It isn't. It's a transition. Once the dust settled, I started noticing the gaps my family had occupied without permission. Sunday afternoons with no obligation to call anyone. Holidays without negotiation. Decisions made without imagining how they would be received. Freedom, it turned out, was disorienting. The first real consequence showed up at work. My managing director, Laura Bennett, called me into her office one Friday afternoon. She was a composed woman in her early 40s, known for never wasting words. "I want to be clear," she said, folding her hands on the desk. "None of what's happened with your family has affected your standing here." "I didn't think it had," I said. "It hasn't," she confirmed. "But something else has." She slid a folder across the desk. "We're opening a new internal oversight division," she said. "High risk, high visibility. Regulatory exposure in 3 states. I want you to lead it." I looked down at the numbers, the budget, the scope. "This is a promotion," I said. "Yes," Laura replied. "And it comes with scrutiny. You'd be the face of it." I understood what she wasn't saying. Public leadership required stability, credibility, a life that wouldn't implode under pressure. "I can handle it," I said. She nodded once. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm offering it now." I accepted. 2 weeks later, Andrew pled not guilty. The news came through an article forwarded by a former colleague of his. I didn't read past the headline. I didn't need to. Melissa moved back into my parents' house. A neighbor mentioned it casually, like gossip that had lost its edge. My mother stopped trying to contact me altogether. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I missed her, but because it confirmed something I'd always suspected. She only reached out when she needed leverage. My father tried once more. He showed up outside my building one evening, standing across the street like he wasn't sure he was allowed closer. I saw him through my window. I didn't go down. Instead, I watched him wait for 20 minutes before turning away. That was the moment I felt something loosen inside me. Not anger, acceptance. I started therapy shortly after that. Not because I was falling apart, but because I didn't want to carry this forward into the life I was building. The therapist, Dr. Lane Porter, listened without interrupting as I explained the family dynamics, the lawsuit, the trust, the silence afterward. "You were the stabilizer," she said when I finished. "The system worked because you absorbed the imbalance." "I stopped doing that," I said. "Yes," she replied. "And systems don't like change." I laughed quietly. "No," I said. "They don't." She asked me what I wanted next. The question caught me off guard. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've spent so long reacting." She nodded. "Then start choosing," she said. That night, I booked a trip. Nothing dramatic, no grand statement, just 10 days alone in Northern California. No family, no obligations, no one who knew my history. I walked, I read, I slept. And for the first time in years, my thoughts weren't tethered to other people's expectations. When I came back, there was a message waiting for me from Jonathan Pierce. The estate administrator finalized distributions, he wrote. Everything is settled. I stared at the screen for a long time. Settled. I closed my laptop and went for a walk. As I passed families on the sidewalk, I realized something else. The story wasn't about them anymore. It had stopped being about them the moment I stopped needing them to understand. The next chapter begins with a public moment I didn't plan, a question I didn't expect, and the realization that healing sometimes looks like being seen on your own terms. The panel invitation arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, buried between compliance memos and calendar alerts. At first, I assumed it was a mistake. The email was from a professional association I'd been part of for years. One of those memberships you maintain quietly, never expecting it to matter. They were hosting a public forum in Boston on ethics, governance, and fiduciary responsibility in family-controlled businesses. They wanted me on stage, not as a technical expert, as a case. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. My first instinct was to decline. I had worked hard to close that chapter, to stop letting my family's behavior define the narrative around me. Speaking publicly felt like reopening a door I just managed to seal, but something in the wording stopped me. We believe your perspective would be valuable, not sensational, not exploitative, deliberate. I accepted. The event was held in a hotel ballroom near the waterfront, neutral territory. About 200 people attended, mostly professionals, lawyers, accountants, executives, people who understood systems, not melodrama. I sat on stage beside 3 men I didn't know, all of them older, all of them accomplished. They talked about governance failures, oversight gaps, risk mitigation. Then the moderator turned to me. You were involved in a highly publicized estate dispute, she said. What do you believe went wrong? The room went quiet. I could feel it, the collective attention, waiting for anger or accusation. Instead, I said this. Nothing went wrong suddenly, I said. It went wrong slowly, through years of small exclusions that were easier to justify than to challenge. I talked about silence, about how families normalize imbalance by rewarding the people who make things easy and sidelining the ones who ask questions. About how professionalism had taught me to document what emotional loyalty had trained me to ignore. I didn't name anyone. I didn't need to. After the panel, a woman in the audience approached me. Late 40s, well-dressed, calm. My name is Rachel Kim, she said. I'm a board advisor for privately held companies. What you said about silence resonated. She paused. I grew up in a similar family. We talked for 10 minutes. About work, about boundaries, about how competence often threatens people who benefit from disorder. Before she left, she handed me her card. If you ever want to consult, she said, call me. There's a demand for what you bring. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, my family had dismissed my expertise as irrelevant to their world. Now, that same skill set was opening doors I hadn't even considered. 2 weeks later, my name appeared in an industry newsletter. Not in the context of my family, in the context of governance reform. That distinction mattered more than I expected. The email from my mother came the next day. Not angry, not pleading, measured. I heard about the panel. You spoke well. No apology, no acknowledgement, just observation. I didn't reply. That night, I ran into Andrew by accident. It happened outside a courthouse in Lower Manhattan. I was leaving a meeting with Jonathan. He was arriving with his attorney. We stopped at the same crosswalk. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He looked thinner. His suit was worn. His posture no longer expansive. You look well, he said finally. I am, I replied. He nodded once. I didn't think it would end like this, he said. I did, I replied. Just not when. The light changed. As I stepped off the curb, he spoke again. I used to think you were weak, he said. I stopped, turned back. No, I said calmly. You thought I wouldn't fight back. That's not the same thing. He didn't respond. I walked away. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Because the encounter didn't shake me. It didn't validate me either. It simply existed. And I realized something important. Closure doesn't come from winning. It comes from no longer needing the people who hurt you to see your strength. The next chapter begins with the last loose thread tying me to my family. A decision about inheritance that no one expects. And the moment I finally choose myself without looking back. The last loose thread came in the form of a key. It arrived in a small padded envelope with no return address, postmarked from Connecticut. Inside was a single brass key, old-fashioned, heavier than it needed to be, with a handwritten tag tied to it by string. Greenwich. Study drawer. I knew immediately what it was. My grandmother's house. After the estate was settled, the property had been slated for sale. Andrew had argued for it. Liquidity, he'd called it. The court-appointed administrator agreed. Clean division. No sentiment. No one had mentioned the study. That room had always been Margaret Collins's private space. Floor-to-ceiling shelves. A desk she never let anyone touch. A drawer, she once told me, half joking, was where the truth goes when people aren't ready for it. Jonathan Pierce confirmed what I already suspected when I called him. The contents of the study were inventoried, he said. But one locked drawer was noted as inaccessible. The administrator planned to force it open. I want to go myself, I said. There was a pause. That's reasonable, Jonathan replied. Legally, you can. I drove up to Greenwich the following Saturday. The house looked smaller than it had in my memory. Empty. Neutral. Like it had already begun forgetting us. A realtor's sign stood at the edge of the lawn, angled toward the street. I let myself in. The air inside was still. No scent of perfume or furniture polish. Just dust and wood and time. I walked straight to the study. The desk was exactly as I remembered it. Dark oak, scratches near the edges. The drawer at the bottom locked tight. The key slid in smoothly. Inside were folders, letters, a leather-bound notebook, and a sealed envelope with my name on it. Claire Morgan. My hands didn't shake when I opened it. Inside was a letter, dated 2 months before my grandmother died. She wrote the way she spoke. Direct, unembellished. You will be tempted to give this back. Don't. You will wonder if using it makes you no better than them. It doesn't. Truth isn't a weapon unless someone has something to hide. She explained everything. The transfer Andrew had made. The pressure Eleanor applied. The reason the codicil was rushed. The fact that Margaret had tried to reverse it when she realized what was happening, but her health declined too quickly. Then came the part that changed everything. I have left you discretion, not as a test of kindness, but of clarity. Some people mistake mercy for weakness. You never have. At the bottom was an attachment. A notarized letter from years earlier, never filed, never shown. A personal addendum to her will. If at any point my estate becomes a tool for manipulation or control, I instruct Claire Morgan to remove herself entirely from family obligation and act only in alignment with her own judgment. I sat there for a long time, not crying, not smiling, just absorbing. When I left the house, I took only the documents and the notebook. I locked the door behind me and left the key on the kitchen counter. That chapter was closed. The call from my mother came that evening. I answered. You went to the house, Eleanor said, not a question. Yes, I replied. There were things in there that belonged to the family, she said. There were things in there that belonged to the truth, I said. Those don't belong to everyone. Her breath caught. You're cutting us out completely, she said. I already was, I replied. You're just noticing now. There was a long silence. I did love you, she said quietly. I believed she believed that. I know, I said. It just wasn't enough. She hung up. The inheritance paperwork finalized 2 weeks later. I made one final decision. I declined the family home's proceeds entirely. Not redirected, not donated. Declined. The administrator was confused. Andrew's attorney objected. Eleanor was furious. But legally, it was mine to refuse. I kept what my grandmother had intended for me personally. I let the rest go. Because inheritance isn't just money. It's permission, and I didn't need theirs. That night, I packed away the letters, the notebook, the evidence. I didn't destroy them. I didn't display them. I archived them. not as leverage, as closure. The next chapter is the last one. It begins with a holiday I never thought I'd reclaim. A lesson I finally stop resisting. And the moment I understand that revenge isn't about what you take back, but what you no longer carry. The first Christmas I spent alone was also the first one that felt honest. No travel plans, no negotiations, no careful choreography around other people's expectations. Just my apartment, a small tree I bought on impulse, and a quiet stretch of days I didn't owe to anyone. On Christmas Eve, it snowed lightly, the kind that softens the city without shutting it down. I stood by the window with a mug of coffee, watching people hurry past with bags and wrapped boxes, and felt something I hadn't expected: relief. For years, holidays had been endurance tests, performances of belonging where I was present but never central, included but never chosen. I had spent so much time bracing myself for disappointment that I never asked whether the tradition itself deserved my loyalty. That night, I cooked for myself, nothing elaborate, something warm. I ate slowly, without background noise, without a phone on the table. No one forgot me. No one excluded me, because no one had the power to. The messages came anyway. A distant cousin wishing me well. A former colleague thanking me again for something I'd said months earlier. Rachel Kim forwarding an article on governance reform with a short note. Thought of you. There was one message I didn't open. It was from my mother. I saw the preview. I didn't need the content. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. In January, Andrew took a plea deal. It didn't make headlines. It didn't need to. The consequences were precise: financial penalties, probation, a quiet, irreversible loss of credibility, the kind that follows you longer than jail time ever could. Melissa moved out of my parents' house again. I heard she was working part-time, trying to rebuild something that looked like independence. I wished her well, in the abstract, the way you wish well for someone you no longer walk toward. My father stopped trying. That might have hurt, once. Now, it felt like respect. At work, the oversight division launched on schedule. The pressure was real, the scrutiny constant. I thrived anyway. Not because I was hardened, but because I no longer carried the weight of proving myself to people who would never be satisfied. One afternoon, Dr. Elaine Porter asked me a question I'd been avoiding. If you could summarize what you learned, she said, what would it be? I thought about it. Delayed justice still counts, I said. And revenge doesn't have to look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like choosing yourself and walking away clean. She nodded. That's not revenge, she said. That's sovereignty. Maybe. The truth is, I didn't win by taking anything from my family. I won by refusing to keep paying the price of their approval. They taught me that love was conditional, that belonging had requirements, that silence was safer than truth. I believed them for a long time, until I didn't. The last time I thought about the inheritance, I wasn't angry. I wasn't resentful. I wasn't even nostalgic. I was grateful. Not for the money, for the clarity. I learned where my boundaries were. I learned how quietly betrayal can happen when it wears the mask of family. I learned that dignity doesn't announce itself. It waits for you to claim it. And once you do, everything changes. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been excluded, overlooked, or made to feel small by the people who were supposed to protect you, take a moment to like this story, leave a comment, and subscribe. Not because my story matters more than yours, but because choosing yourself is a decision worth witnessing. I didn't become louder. I became unavailable to manipulation. And that, in the end, was the most effective revenge of all.